The boardroom fell silent. 20 of the world's most powerful business leaders sat frozen around a massive glass table, their mouths hanging open in shock. Papers worth billions of dollars scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. The room that had been buzzing with excitement just seconds before was now dead quiet. Before we begin the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Please subscribe to my channel for more sweet videos like this. Let the story continue. Standing in the doorway was a man in a dirty blue uniform. His name tag read Miguel Rodriguez, Custodial Services. In his weathered hands, he held a simple manila folder. His work boots squeaked against the polished marble floor as he stepped into the room where he definitely did not belong. "Excuse me," Miguel said in a quiet voice that somehow filled the entire room. "I need to show you something." Richard Blackstone, the CEO of Titan Industries, turned red with anger. His face looked like a tomato about to explode. This was supposed to be the biggest deal of his life, a $5.2 billion merger that would make him one of the richest men in America. And now some janitor was ruining everything. "Security!" Blackstone screamed, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "Get this man out of here immediately." But Miguel didn't move. He looked straight at Blackstone with eyes that seemed to see right through him. The folder in his hands might as well have been a bomb, because everyone in that room somehow knew that whatever was inside, it would change everything forever. The security guards burst through the doors, their heavy boots thundering against the floor. They reached for Miguel's arms, ready to drag him away like a bag of trash. But just as their fingers touched his uniform, Miguel opened the folder. "You might want to see this before you throw me out," he said calmly. He pulled out a single sheet of paper and held it up for everyone to see. "It's about the Riverside Elementary School incident from 1997. Blackstone's face went from red to white faster than snow melting in the sun. His hands started shaking so badly that he had to grip the edge of the table to keep from falling over. The other businessmen looked confused, but they could tell something terrible was happening. "How did you?" Blackstone whispered, his voice barely louder than a mouse. Miguel smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was a kind of smile that meant someone was about to get exactly what they deserved after a very long time. 27 years ago, Mr. Blackstone, you made a promise to a little girl and her father. A promise you broke without thinking twice about it. That little girl grew up believing her daddy was a liar because of you." The security guards froze. Everyone in the room felt like they were watching a movie, but they couldn't tell if it was going to be a comedy or a horror film. Miguel took another step forward. The paper in his hand seemed to glow under the bright boardroom lights. "That little girl was my daughter, Isabella. And today, Mr. Blackstone, is the day you finally keep your promise." Blackstone's legs gave out. He collapsed into his leather chair like a punctured balloon. The $5.2 billion deal, the deal that was supposed to make him a legend, suddenly seemed as unimportant as yesterday's newspaper. "You see, gentlemen," Miguel continued, looking around the room at all the shocked faces, "sometimes the most important business happens in the janitor's closet. And sometimes the person everyone ignores is the one who's been watching everything all along." The folder slipped from Miguel's hands and hit the floor with a sound that echoed through the silent room like thunder. But as the paper scattered across the expensive carpet, everyone could see that there were dozens more documents inside. Legal papers, contracts, photos, evidence. Evidence of what? And how did a simple janitor get his hands on information that could make a billionaire's legs turn to jelly? Richard Blackstone looked up at Miguel with eyes full of fear and something else, recognition. Because deep down, in a part of his heart he thought he had locked away forever, he remembered a small school, a broken promise, and a little girl who had trusted him completely. But how had that promise led to this moment? And what was Miguel planning to do with that folder full of secrets that could destroy not just Blackstone, but everyone else in that room? The answers to those questions would have to wait, because just then, the boardroom doors burst open again. This time, it wasn't security guards who walked in. It was the FBI. Agent Sarah Chen flashed her badge as she walked into chaos. Behind her came 3 more agents, all wearing dark suits and serious expressions. The businessmen around the table looked like deer caught in headlights, not knowing whether to run or hide under the table. "Nobody move," Agent Chin announced. Her voice was calm but firm, like a teacher who had caught students cheating on a test. "We're here on official business." Miguel turned to face the agents, and for the first time since he'd entered the boardroom, he smiled a real smile. "You're right on time, Agent Chun." "Wait, the janitor knew the FBI agent?" Richard Blackstone's head was spinning so fast he thought he might throw up. Nothing made sense anymore. How did a man who cleaned toilets for a living know federal agents by name? "Mr. Rodriguez has been working with us for the past 6 months. Agent Chun explained to the confused room. "He's been gathering evidence of illegal business practices, tax evasion, and fraud." The businessmen started talking all at once, their voices mixing together like a bunch of angry chickens. Some of them jumped up from their chairs, others reached for their phones, and a few just sat there looking like they'd seen a ghost. "Quiet!" Agent Chin shouted, and the room went silent again. "Mr. Rodriguez, would you please tell these gentlemen how this all started?" Miguel picked up the scattered papers from his folder and walked to the front of the room, even covered in dust from his morning cleaning duties. He somehow looked more important than anyone else there. "It started 27 years ago," Miguel began, his voice steady and strong. "I was a young man working 2 jobs to pay for night school. I wanted to become an engineer, but I needed money for my family first." He looked directly at Richard Blackstone, who was still slumped in his chair like a broken toy. Back then, Mr. Blackstone wasn't the big shot CEO he is today. He was just a middle manager at Harrison Construction Company. They had a contract to build a new elementary school in Riverside, a poor neighborhood where my family lived. Miguel's eyes got a faraway look, like he was seeing the past instead of the fancy boardroom. "My little girl Isabella was 6 years old. Every day, she would walk past a construction site on her way to her old school, a building that was falling apart with broken windows and a roof that leaked when it rained. But she was so excited about the new school. She would press her face against a chain-link fence and watch the workers. Some of the businessmen shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They weren't used to hearing about poor neighborhoods and little girls. They preferred talking about numbers and profits. One day, Isabella was at the fence when Mr. Blackstone walked by. She was such a friendly child. She talked to everyone. She asked him when the school would be finished. Miguel's voice started to shake a little, but he kept going. Blackstone stopped and talked to her. He seemed nice. He told her the school would be the most beautiful building she'd ever seen. He promised her it would have a big library, a computer room, and even a playground with swings that touched the sky. Richard Blackstone closed his eyes, like he was trying to make the memory disappear. Isabella came home that day so excited. Miguel continued. "She told me about the nice man who promised her the most wonderful school in the world. She drew pictures of it. She talked about it every single day for months." Agent Chin stepped forward. "Tell them what happened next, Miguel." Miguel's hands tightened around the papers. The construction company ran into money problems. Instead of using the good materials they promised, they started buying cheap ones. Instead of the beautiful library, they built a tiny room with no windows. Instead of computer room, they put in an old storage closet. Instead of the playground, they poured a small patch of concrete. The room was so quiet you could hear everyone breathing. But the worst part, Miguel said, his voice getting stronger, was that they used materials that weren't safe. The paint had lead in it. The insulation was made of dangerous chemicals. The wiring was done so cheaply that it was a fire hazard. One of the businessmen at the table, a man with gray hair and glasses, spoke up. "How do you know all this?" Miguel smiled sadly. "Because I was working there. Not as an engineer like I dreamed, but as a cleanup worker. I saw everything. I tried to tell the supervisors about the problems, but they said I was just a janitor and I should keep my mouth shut." Agent Chin opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick file. Mr. Rodriguez documented everything he saw. He took pictures, saved receipts, and made copies of orders for the cheap materials. But he was afraid to speak up because he needed the job to feed his family. 3 months after the school opened, Miguel continued, a little boy got sick from the lead paint. then another child, then 5 more. The school had to be closed for repairs, but they never fixed it properly. They just painted over the problems and reopened it. Miguel looked around the room at all the wealthy men in their expensive suits. My daughter Isabella was so disappointed. The man in the nice suit had promised her a beautiful school, and instead, she got a building that made children sick. She thought her daddy had lied to her about how wonderful the world could be. Richard Blackstone finally found his voice. That wasn't my fault. I was just following orders. I didn't make the decisions about materials. Miguel pulled out a piece of paper from his folder. This is your signature, Mr. Blackstone. You signed off on every single order for cheap materials. You saved the company $2.3 million by cutting corners. And do you know what your bonus was that year for cost savings? Blackstone's face went white again. $50,000, Miguel said. You got $50,000 for breaking a promise to my little girl and putting hundreds of children in danger. Agent Chin stepped forward again. That school incident was just the beginning. Over the past 27 years, Mr. Blackstone has been involved in dozens of similar schemes, cutting corners on hospitals, bridges, apartment buildings, always to save money, always putting people at risk. Miguel nodded. I kept track of every single project. Every time he hurt people to make money. I worked as a janitor in the buildings his companies constructed. I cleaned the offices where he made his deals. And slowly, I gathered evidence. The businessmen around the table were starting to look nervous. If Blackstone had been doing illegal things for 27 years, and if the FBI was involved, then maybe this $5.2 billion deal wasn't going to happen after all. But why today? Asked the gray-haired man. Why interrupt this meeting? Miguel's eyes grew hard. Because this deal you're all so excited about is to build a chain of new schools across the country. 47 elementary schools in poor neighborhoods. And Mr. Blackstone plans to use the same cheap, dangerous materials he's been using for decades. The room erupted in shocked voices again. Several businessmen jumped to their feet, pointing fingers at each other and shouting about contracts and legal liability. Agent Chun held up her hand for silence. We have evidence that this entire deal is based on fraud, fake safety reports, bribed inspectors, and plans to use materials that don't meet federal safety standards. Miguel walked over to where Blackstone was sitting and looked down at him. 27 years ago, you broke a promise to a 6-year-old girl. Today, I'm keeping the promise I made to her, that someday, somehow, the man who lied to her would have to face the truth. But just as Miguel finished speaking, something unexpected happened. Richard Blackstone started to laugh. Not a happy laugh, but a cold, mean laugh that sent shivers down everyone's spine. You think you've won, don't you, Miguel? Blackstone said, standing up slowly. His fear seemed to have disappeared, replaced by something much more dangerous. You think your little folder of papers is going to bring me down? Agent Chin stepped forward, her hand moving toward her weapon. Something was very wrong. Blackstone reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. Well, let me tell you something, Mr. Rodriguez. You're not the only one who's been planning for 27 years. He pressed a button on his phone, and immediately, every light in the building went out. The darkness was complete. 20 stories above the city street, the boardroom became as black as the inside of a cave. Emergency lighting should have kicked in, but nothing happened. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the heavy breathing of 20 terrified people. Nobody move. Agent Chun shouted into the darkness. This is the FBI. Everyone stay exactly where you are. But her voice sounded different now. Scared, uncertain. In the dark, even FBI agents seemed small and powerless. Richard Blackstone's laughter echoed through the room like the sound of breaking glass. Did you really think I became a billionaire by being stupid, Miguel? Did you think I didn't know you were watching me all these years? A small red light appeared in the darkness, the glow from Blackstone's phone screen. It cast weird shadows on his face, making him look like a monster from a scary movie. You see, gentlemen, Blackstone continued, speaking to the invisible businessmen around the table. Mr. Rodriguez here isn't just any janitor. He's actually quite brilliant. MIT graduate, top of his engineering class, 3 patents for building safety systems. He gave up a promising career to take care of his sick wife and raise his daughter. Miguel's voice came from somewhere in the darkness, calm and steady. How long have you known? 15 years, Blackstone replied. I've been watching you watch me, Miguel. Every building you cleaned, every document you copied, every photo you took, I knew about all of it. The red glow from the phone moved as Blackstone walked around the table. His footsteps echoed in the silent room. At first, I was going to have you fired, maybe even arrested for trespassing and theft. But then I realized something interesting. You were doing such a good job gathering evidence of my business practices that you were actually helping me. Agent Chen's voice cut through the darkness. What do you mean? Think about it, Agent Chen. If Miguel had evidence of my crimes, and I knew he had that evidence, then I could control exactly what evidence he found. I could feed him information that made me look guilty of small crimes while hiding the really big ones. A chill ran through the room that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Several of the businessmen started whispering to each other, trying to figure out what was happening. Miguel's voice was still calm, but now there was something else in it. A hint of worry. The school documents. Fake, Blackstone said happily. Oh, the Riverside Elementary incident was real enough. But all those other documents you've been collecting for 15 years? The ones that show me cutting corners on hospitals and bridges? Complete fiction. I had my people create them specifically for you to find. Agent Chen tried to sound professional, but her voice was shaking. That's impossible. We verified those documents through multiple sources. Blackstone's laughter was getting louder and more frightening. Sources that I control, Agent Chen. You see, when you have enough money, you can buy anyone. Inspectors, city officials, even FBI informants. The phone's red glow stopped moving. Blackstone was standing still now, somewhere near the head of the table. Miguel spent 27 years planning his revenge, Blackstone continued. But I spent 15 years planning mine. Every piece of evidence he gathered, every meeting he had with the FBI, every move he made, it was all part of my plan. One of the businessmen, his voice shaky with fear, called out from the darkness. What about this deal? The $5.2 billion merger? Oh, that's completely real, Blackstone said. And it's going to happen exactly as planned. You see, gentlemen, I needed a way to get the FBI and Mr. Rodriguez in the same room at the same time. I needed witnesses to what happens next. Agent Chung was trying to stay in control, but everyone could hear the panic in her voice. Rodriguez, do you have your weapon? I'm not armed, Miguel replied quietly. I'm just a janitor, remember? But there was something strange about the way he said it. Something that didn't sound quite right. Blackstone must have heard it too, because his laughter stopped suddenly. Miguel, what aren't you telling us? For the first time since the lights went out, Miguel laughed. It was a warm, gentle sound that somehow made everyone feel a little less afraid. You're right about most things, Richard, Miguel said. You did figure out that I was watching you 15 years ago. You did feed me fake evidence to throw me off track. And you are much smarter than I gave you credit for. Then why are you laughing? Blackstone snapped. Because you made one tiny mistake, Miguel replied. You assumed that I was working alone. Suddenly, the lights came back on, but they weren't the normal bright boardroom lights. Instead, soft emergency lighting filled the room, just enough to see everyone's faces. Standing by the light switch was a woman in a business suit. She was young, maybe 30 years old, with dark hair and her father's kind eyes. Hello, Mr. Blackstone, she said in a voice that was strong and clear. My name is Isabella Rodriguez. I believe you made me a promise 27 years ago. Richard Blackstone's face went through about 10 different expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, fear, and finally, pure terror. Isabella, he whispered. But you're supposed to be a scared little girl? Isabella finished for him. I was, for a long time. But little girls grow up, Mr. Blackstone, and sometimes they become federal prosecutors. Agent Chin suddenly smiled for the first time since entering the room. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Assistant U.S. Attorney Isabella Rodriguez, the lead prosecutor on this case. The businessmen around the table looked like they were watching a tennis match, their heads turning back and forth between Miguel, Isabella, and Blackstone. Isabella walked to the center of the room, and everyone could see that she was carrying a briefcase that looked much more official than her father's simple manila folder. "My father did spend 27 years gathering evidence," she said. "And you're right that some of it was fake. But what you didn't know, Mr. Blackstone, is that while you were feeding him false information about small crimes, he was actually investigating something much bigger." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents. "For the past 15 years, while you thought you were controlling my father, he was actually working with a joint task force of the FBI, the Department of Education, and the Environmental Protection Agency. We weren't interested in your small-time fraud, Mr. Blackstone. We were building a case against your entire network." Blackstone's phone slipped from his hands and clattered to the floor. "You see," Isabella continued, "when you cut corners on that elementary school 27 years ago, you didn't just hurt the children who got sick. You created a pattern of behavior that we've been tracking across 17 states. Hundreds of buildings, thousands of safety violations, and a network of corrupt officials that reaches all the way to Washington, D.C. Miguel stood up from where he'd been sitting in the darkness. For the first time, everyone could see that he wasn't just wearing a janitor's uniform. Underneath his work shirt, there was something that looked like a wire. "Every conversation you've had with me for the past 15 years has been recorded," Miguel said quietly. "Every bribe you've offered, every threat you've made, every time you bragged about cheating the system, we have it all on tape." Isabella smiled at her father with pride and love, including your confession from about 5 minutes ago, where you admitted to creating false evidence and bribing federal officials. But Blackstone wasn't finished yet. His face twisted into an ugly snarl, and he reached into his jacket again. This time, he didn't pull out a phone. "You think you're so smart," he hissed. "But I have one more surprise for you." What he pulled out made everyone in the room freeze with terror. Because sometimes, when very bad people realize they're caught, they decide that if they can't win, then nobody can. But it wasn't a weapon. It was a small black device about the size of a TV remote, with a single red button on top. Blackstone held it up like it was the most powerful thing in the world. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, his voice now completely calm and cold. Agent Chun had her hand on her gun, but she didn't draw it. Something about the way Blackstone was holding the device made her hesitate. Isabella stepped forward, her prosecutor training kicking in. "Mr. Blackstone, whatever you're thinking of doing, it will only make things worse for you." Blackstone laughed, but this time it wasn't the crazy laughter from before. This was the laugh of someone who thought they held all the cards. "Worse? My dear Isabella, I'm looking at life in prison. How could things possibly get worse?" He waved the device in the air. "This little button is connected to explosive charges in the foundation of this building. If I push it, all 40 floors come down in about 30 seconds. The businessmen around the table started panicking again. Some of them ran toward the door, but it wouldn't open. Others pressed themselves against the windows, looking down at the street far below. "The doors are locked electronically," Blackstone explained. "The elevators are shut down. The fire stairs are blocked. Nobody leaves this room until I say so." Miguel looked at his daughter with worried eyes, but Isabella's face remained calm and determined. She had spent her whole career dealing with dangerous criminals, and she wasn't about to let fear control her now. "You're bluffing," she said firmly. "You wouldn't blow up a building full of innocent people just to avoid going to jail." Blackstone's finger moved closer to the red button. "Innocent people? Look around this room. Isabella, these men have stolen billions of dollars from taxpayers. They've built unsafe buildings that have killed dozens of people. They've poisoned water supplies and covered up environmental disasters. The only innocent people in this room are you, your father, and Agent Chun." One of the businessmen, a fat man with a sweaty face, started crying. "Please, Richard, I have grandchildren. I never meant for anyone to get hurt." "But people did get hurt, didn't they, Peterson?" Blackstone snarled. "Remember the apartment building in Detroit? The one where you used concrete that was mostly sand? 12 families lost their homes when it collapsed." Miguel had been quiet during this exchange, but now he stepped forward. For some reason, He didn't look scared at all. In fact, he looked like he was trying not to smile. "Richard," Miguel said gently, "can I ask you a question?" Blackstone kept his finger hovering over the button. "Make it quick. How long do you think it takes to plant explosive charges in the foundation of a 40-story building?" Blackstone frowned. "What kind of question is that?" "A practical one," Miguel replied. "You see, I've been working in this building for 3 years. I know every pipe, every wire, every support beam, and I can tell you that it would take at least 6 months to plant enough explosives to bring down this building. Maybe longer." Isabella caught on to what her father was saying. "And you've only known about this meeting for 2 weeks. Blackstone's confident expression started to crack. I had this plan for months. I knew eventually." "No, you didn't," Miguel interrupted. "Because this meeting was my idea." The room went completely silent again. Even Agent Chen looked confused. Miguel reached into his janitor's uniform and pulled out another device, one that looked exactly like Blackstone's remote control. "You see, Richard, you were right about one thing. I did spend 27 years planning my revenge, but I didn't just want to put you in jail. I want to catch all of you." He gestured around the room at all the terrified businessmen. "Every person in this room has worked with you on illegal projects. Every one of them has hurt innocent people to make money. But they were all too careful, too smart to get caught individually." Isabella smiled proudly at her father. "So we created a situation where they would all come together in one place, thinking they were about to make the biggest deal of their lives." "The $5.2 billion school construction deal was fake?" asked Agent Chen. "Completely fake," Miguel confirmed. "We created an entire fictional company, complete with bank records, construction plans, and government contracts. It took us 2 years to make it look real enough to fool these experts." Blackstone was staring at his remote control, like it had turned into a snake. But the explosives. Miguel held up his own device. "There are no explosives, Richard. This is just a garage door opener I bought at the hardware store. I'm guessing yours is too." Blackstone pressed his button frantically, but nothing happened. The building didn't shake, no alarms went off, and nobody died. "You were so busy trying to outsmart me," Miguel continued, "that you never stopped to think that maybe I was trying to outsmart you too." Agent Chen was starting to understand. The power outage, the locked doors. "All part of the plan," Isabella said. "We needed to keep everyone in this room long enough to get full confessions from all of them. The room has been recording everything since the moment you all sat down." She pointed to tiny cameras hidden in the light fixtures and air vents. "We have Peterson admitting to the Detroit apartment collapse. We have Williams confessing to the poisoned water supply in Ohio. We have Martinez talking about the bribes he paid to get the hospital contracts in Texas." The businessmen looked around the room in horror, realizing they had been tricked into confessing to crimes they thought would never be discovered. But Miguel wasn't done yet. He walked over to where Blackstone was standing and looked him straight in the eyes. 27 years ago, you made a promise to my 6-year-old daughter. You told her she would have the most beautiful school in the world. Instead, you gave her a building that made children sick." Blackstone seemed to shrink under Miguel's gaze. But Isabella grew up believing that promises should be kept and that people who hurt children should be punished. She became a prosecutor because of what you did to her. Miguel's voice got softer, but somehow more powerful. "And today, she's going to keep the promise you broke. Not just for her, but for every child who was hurt by your greed." Isabella opened her briefcase again and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. "Richard Blackstone, you're under arrest for fraud, bribery, conspiracy, reckless endangerment, and about 40 other charges. The same goes for every other person in this room." She nodded to Agent Chun, who finally drew her weapon and started reading everyone their rights. "You have the right to remain silent." But as the handcuffs clicked into place around Blackstone's wrists, he looked up at Miguel with something that might have been respect. "How?" he whispered. "How did a janitor outsmart all of us?" Miguel smiled the same gentle smile he'd had when Isabella was 6 years old, and believed the world was full of good people who kept their promises. "I learned from the best teacher in the world, Richard, I learned from my daughter. She taught me that if you really want to clean up a mess, you have to be willing to get your hands dirty. As the FBI agents led the businessman away in handcuffs, Miguel looked around the boardroom one last time. After 27 years, it was finally over. But just as he was about to leave, Isabella grabbed his arm. "Dad," she said urgently, "there's something I need to tell you. Something we discovered yesterday that changes everything." Miguel turned to look at his daughter, and the expression on her face made his heart skip a beat. Because after all they'd been through, after all the planning and all the victories, Isabella looked scared. "What is it, Mija?" Miguel asked, using the Spanish nickname he'd called her since she was little. After 27 years of planning and 3 years of dangerous undercover work, what could possibly scare his brave daughter now? Isabella glanced around the boardroom. The FBI agents were still busy handcuffing businessmen and reading them their rights, but she lowered her voice anyway. "Dad, when we were investigating Blackstone's network, we found something we weren't looking for. Something that goes way beyond construction fraud." She pulled out her phone and showed him a photograph. It was a document with official government letterhead, but Miguel couldn't make out the details in the dim emergency lighting. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "It's a list of schools, Dad. Not just the ones Blackstone built with cheap materials, but schools all across the country. Over 3,000 buildings in 47 states." Miguel felt a chill run down his spine. "Schools built by other companies?" "No," Isabella said quietly. "Schools that were deliberately targeted for closure. The plan was to use Blackstone's unsafe buildings as an excuse to shut down public education in poor neighborhoods and replace it with private schools that only wealthy families can afford." The weight of what she was saying hit Miguel like a truck. They were going to use sick children as an excuse to destroy public education for millions of kids, Isabella finished. "And we only found out about it yesterday because one of Blackstone's partners got scared and tried to make a deal with us." Miguel looked around the boardroom at the men in handcuffs. Suddenly, catching a few dozen corrupt businessmen didn't seem like nearly enough. "How many people are involved in this?" he asked. "We don't know yet. Maybe hundreds. Politicians, business leaders, even some people in the Department of Education." Isabella's voice was shaking now. "Dad, what we did today was just the beginning. This thing is so much bigger than we thought." Miguel was quiet for a long moment, thinking. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and determined. "Then we keep going." "What do you mean?" Miguel smiled at his daughter, the same smile he'd given her when she was 6 years old, and asked if he would always protect her. "I mean, we made a promise 27 years ago, Isabella. We promised that little girl who got sick from lead paint that we would make sure it never happened to other children." He looked around the room at all the evidence they'd gathered, all the confessions they'd recorded, all the justice they'd served. "Today, we kept that promise for you and for the children at Riverside Elementary. But there are millions of other children who need someone to keep promises for them too." Isabella stared at her father with amazement. "You want to go after the whole network? Dad, it could take years. Decades." "Then it takes decades," Miguel said simply. "You became a prosecutor because you wanted to protect children. I became whatever I needed to become to help you do that." Agent Chin walked over to them, having finished processing the arrested businessmen. "Mr. Rodriguez, Ms. Rodriguez, we're going to need you both to come to the federal building for debriefing. This case is going to make headlines around the world." Miguel nodded, but he was still looking at his daughter. "Isabella, do you remember what you used to say when you were little? When you would draw up pictures of that beautiful school Blackstone promised you." Isabella's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I used to say that someday every little girl and boy would have a school so wonderful that it would make them happy just to walk through the doors." "And do you still believe that's possible?" "Yes," Isabella said without hesitation. "Especially now that I know what we're capable of when we work together." Miguel hugged his daughter tightly. Over her shoulder, he could see the city lights twinkling through the boardroom windows. Somewhere out there were thousands of schools, millions of children, and countless people who thought they were powerless to change anything. "You know what the best part is?" Miguel whispered to Isabella. "What?" "They'll never see us coming. Because who pays attention to janitors and government lawyers? We're invisible to people like them. Isabella laughed through her tears. Dad, I think you might be the smartest man I've ever met. No, Mija. I just learned a long time ago that the most important work happens in places where powerful people never bother to look. Agent Chin cleared her throat. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we really do need to go. The media is starting to gather outside, and the Attorney General wants to speak with both of you. As they walked toward the door, Miguel stopped and looked back at the boardroom one last time. The table where billion-dollar deals were made, the chairs where powerful men had sat thinking they owned the world, the windows that looked out over a city full of people they'd never bothered to care about. What are you thinking, Dad? Isabella asked. Miguel picked up his mop and bucket from where he'd left them by the door hours earlier. Even after everything that had happened, he was still technically on duty as a janitor. I'm thinking about all the other buildings I need to clean, he said with a grin. All the other offices where important people make decisions about other people's lives. And I'm wondering what interesting conversations I might overhear while I'm emptying their trash cans. Isabella shook her head in amazement. You're not really going back to being a janitor, are you? Are you kidding? Miguel laughed. This is the best job in the world for someone who wants to keep promises to children. Nobody suspects the guy with the mop. As they left the boardroom together, father and daughter, janitor and prosecutor, promise keeper and promise maker, Miguel thought about all the children who were sleeping safely in their beds tonight because of what they'd accomplished. But more importantly, he thought about all the children who would sleep safely tomorrow night, and the night after that, and for years to come, because some promises are too important to break. The elevator doors closed behind them, and Miguel Rodriguez, MIT graduate, undercover investigator, and the best janitor in the world, went back to work. After all, there were a lot more messes to clean up. And somewhere in the city below, in schools that would now be built with safe materials and honest contractors, children would learn and grow and dream, never knowing that their bright futures had been protected by a man who understood that the most powerful weapon against injustice is someone willing to work in the shadows for 27 years to keep a promise to a little girl.